Kia ora tātou. Thank you for joining us for Massey University's Retail Reboot webinar, the 9th and last in this series, aiming to help retailers and small businesses adjust to and thrive in the new retail environment. Ko Andrew Murphy aho, I'm a senior lecturer in retail marketing at Massey University, and it's my great pleasure to host you all, and in particular our three guest speakers this morning. We have Greg Harford of Retail NZ, and Bruce Howe and Douglas Shepherd of Putty. Today we're looking at positioning for the long term. At least that's what the title is. This webinar aims to help retailers understand the changing landscape faced by the retail sector in the past few months and over the next few years. Greg has been a highly visible commentator in the media for many years, but in particular through this year, lobbying on behalf of retailers, whether that's the GST levy on overseas retailers, rent and lease abatements, wage subsidies, physical distancing requirements, you name it, Greg has been all over it. We are fortunate to have him here today to share his views on the state of the sector. Putty have also been very active in contact tracing apps and other custom builds, as we will soon hear. Bruce and Douglas will share with us their insights on what's driving customers in the digitizing landscape and on the tool options retailers have to reach and to convert customers. This builds nicely on webinar 1, which we entitled Get Online Fast, where we heard from Zield and Acronym and briefly from Greg, who opened the whole series. And it also builds on webinar 3, which we called Get Engaged Early, Digital Marketing and the Customer Experience, which had Wendy Thompson and Dave Hughes. If you haven't yet watched those webinars, you can find them by Googling Massey and Business Reboot, or check the links in your registration email, which you should have got an email from Massey Business School if you can't find it anymore. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Please keep your microphone on mute while the speakers are doing their thing. We may turn yours off if you're having difficulty with this. If questions come to you during the presentations, please type them into the chat box, which you can bring up on your Zoom control panel. The speakers will refer to them, and if they don't, I'll bring them up on your behalf. We will also have time for questions at the end, and if you would like to ask your question audibly, you can unmute yourself at that point and ask your question. First up, Greg.
Thank you, Andrew, and kia ora, everybody. I'm here just to kind of round off the series that we started with a few weeks ago, and really good to be back to talk about the changing retail landscape, challenges and opportunities, as we've called this. So what I want to do is just do a bit of an introduction, talk about the big picture, what we're seeing in terms of sales trends and customer spending. We're in a very different world to what we were a couple of months ago, and things are moving very rapidly. Following on from there, I wanted to cover off some questions about how we're shopping, what's driving customers, ultimately where retailers headed, and what the opportunities are out in the market for retail businesses. So first, just as background for those of you who don't know us, Retail NZ is a not-for-profit membership organisation. We're there to be asked first on anything retail, and ultimately we want retailers to succeed, and by doing so strengthen NZ Inc. We're all about that New Zealand connection. It's really important that retail is recognised as a key part of the fabric of communities, and it's often the glue that holds town centres together. We do a range of training events. We provide advice and information with the HR department for several thousand small Kiwi retailers. We publish news, intelligence and insight on what's going on in the market. We deliver savings for members, and as Andrew was saying, we speak up for the sector, lobbying government. So that was just by way of background. Our membership accounts for about 2/3 of total retail turnover, and if you're not a member, you should be. So please go to our website and sign up. But that's the end of the advertisement. So what I wanted to do really was just look at the big picture and kind of what's happening in spending land. So this graph here shows you the Retail NZ sales index. It kind of measures year-on-year change between in spending on a month-by-month basis. It will be no surprise to anyone in retail that we saw a big drop off in March, a massive collapse in April, and a little bit of a bounce back in May. But I guess it's unusual times when a bounce back is still something like 20% down on where we were the previous year. So we've seen big drop-offs in consumer spending. Now, we get these numbers monthly, so we don't yet have June numbers available. But what we do have is some numbers from Paymark, which if I can move the slide on, I will show you. So the Paymark numbers are showing that there's been quite a jump in spending really since the lockdown lifted properly and we moved back to level 1 back in mid-May. And they're tracking for last week, they're suggesting that our total spending was about 3% down on last year. That's pretty creditable, actually, if that's the case. We're still operating in an environment where there's several hundred thousands of tourists that are not in the country that would otherwise be spending, and it does suggest that Kiwis are definitely getting out and about and hitting the shops again. I do treat these numbers with just a little bit of caution. Most of the spending data that we have reflects only electronic card transactions. So while we're seeing a reduction here, there will also be a reduction in cash spending that's going on. Anecdotally, we're hearing that about 50%, cash transactions are down about 50%. So that's 50%. That's quite a big chunk of transactions that are suddenly coming out of the market overall. So that 3% number will be a little bit higher. Not sure exactly where, but we're probably down somewhere between 3 and 10% overall. The other really interesting statistics that Paymark is publishing at the moment are around average transaction spend. And it's held fairly constant actually over the last couple of weeks. But the really interesting thing is that they're showing that we're spending more this year on a transaction basis than we were last year. So basket sizes essentially are bigger. In terms of online sales, though, we're seeing a slightly different picture emerge. The number of online transactions has jumped markedly over the course of this year. You can see that peak there in April when the lockdown kicked in. So that was, when total sales were about 100%. We're seeing 100% more transactions than we would have in digital channels the previous year, and that's kind of flattened off, but remained pretty constant over the last month or so. What's really interesting, and these numbers come from our Retail NZ Sales Index, but the really interesting thing here is that the average transaction value is actually declining. So it was holding pretty constant through the first part of the year, but once COVID hit, we've seen a massive jump in online transactions, but the value of those transactions is smaller. So I think there's a couple of key outtakes here. First, when you're talking about bricks and mortar stores, consumers are spending less overall, not necessarily hugely less, but they are spending less, but the average transaction size is up. So people are making fewer but bigger shopping expeditions. They're still going to the supermarket less often than they were in a pre-COVID world. They're still doing bigger shops. And I think that's flowing through into some discretionary spending areas as well. We've obviously seen a big jump in online sales, but the average online transaction is down. So we're doing more online shops than we were previously, but they are smaller. And that's really interesting, I think, because it suggests that we're normalizing online shopping far more than we have in the past, and it's becoming somewhere we go to make those smaller and perhaps more discretionary purchases that we would have otherwise done in the shops. And that's becoming a more normal thing for us to be doing. I think that shift towards online that we've seen is going to continue, particularly for smaller everyday purchases. And I think our prediction at Retail NZ is that we'll see about 20% of spending being done online over the next 12 months. That doesn't necessarily sound like a large number, particularly when you compare it to other markets like the UK, but the number for last year was about 9%. So we're seeing an increase. Probably online sales will double over the next 12 months. The other good piece of news for everyone on this call is that market share is shifting as well. So Market View tracks the market share of New Zealand versus international e-tailers. And through those online sales, they're saying that 73% of transactions were done with New Zealand businesses in May. That's up from about 55% previously, and has been tracking upwards for some time. But I think the COVID situation has really forced consumers to be looking pretty closely at the services that they're able to get locally here in New Zealand, and they're been keen to support local businesses. Partly that's because they haven't had a lot of choice. There have been real issues with fulfillment and logistics of shipments coming in from abroad. So if you've needed something in a hurry, you've probably been looking to a local business, although even there've been challenges with the logistics networks. So it'll be interesting to see whether that holds up down the track. There's been quite a lot of talk about the need to support local shopping and to support Kiwi-made products. I haven't necessarily seen that flow through in the numbers overall, but there's definitely been that jump in market share for New Zealand businesses, which is really awesome to see, and of course comes on the back of what is now a level playing field for GST transactions as well. So I thought it was worth reflecting on just what is driving customers at the moment. And I think my observation is that we're increasingly back very much to a business as usual environment. And my key thesis is that customers are actually the same people they were at the start of the year and have many of the same drivers. So we're still really interested in getting good value for money. We're still really interested in sustainability and increasingly interested in the sustainability credentials of the businesses and products that we're dealing with. But there's a couple of things that have come into play over the last couple of months, which are COVID specific. First, household incomes are impacting consumer confidence. I think consumer confidence is at an all-time low, certainly a low, the lowest point it's been for many, many years. You'll know that there are lots of people who have had their incomes reduced, people are losing their jobs, people having their hours cut back. That's meaning that people have got less money in their pockets, and meaning that people, despite the fact that they're still getting out and spending relatively large amounts of money, they're still spending in quite a restrained way. They're making sure that they're focusing on the essential things, and they're not necessarily looking to go out and do too much in the way of discretionary spend. And the other thing we're seeing is that value is increasingly important. So customers are trading down from luxury products down to more basic brands. It's the classic behaviour that we see in a recessionary environment, and would expect to see more of that continue over the next little while. That has the effect, of course, of bringing perhaps your average basket size down, while your number of transactions may remain up as well. The other thing that is really important to customers and continues to be, and it's not rocket science and it's not new, but the ease of doing business with retailers. Excuse me. We know that customers like to be able to go to a bricks and mortar store, get what they need and walk out. We know that they like to be able to shop online and do that in a seamless and easy way. None of that's changed, and those basic things, I think, hold true, but are probably more important in a post-COVID environment, because the more barriers we collectively put in the way of our customers, the harder it will be. Customer satisfaction is really interesting to look at. We do a bit of work with Customer Radar, who track NPS scores across a very large number of businesses and customers throughout the country. Their data is really interesting because it showed that as we moved into the lockdown period and through the lockdown period, customer satisfaction was at a record high. That's really, I think, a fascinating reflection on the environment we were all in. We were all being kind, as the Prime Minister likes to put it, and customers were being really empathetic towards retailers and retail employees, and they were really understanding about service issues and problems that might have been arising through that period. But that's starting to change. So I've said here that that extended goodwill may be a distant memory. Satisfaction is ultimately returning to pre-lockdown levels now that we're through that, and I think that reinforces what I was saying earlier, that really we're back into very much a business as usual environment. This is just a little graph showing the total NPS scores that Customer Radar records across the country. You can see that big jump there in April and May as retailers were having problems, and B, customers were feeling we were all kind of in this together and working through it. But that's definitely dropping back, and I think if we left that another couple of months, we'd see that coming back down to kind of that 70% level where it's been pretty consistently over time. I think, I mean, it goes without saying really, but it is worth noting that satisfaction levels by customers are driven by their overall experience, and that what's required depends very much on the channel, and it's two sides of the same coin. So what causes customer satisfaction is, if you get it wrong, going to cause customer dissatisfaction. Ultimately, I think those customer needs are pretty simple, but they are different between in-store and online channels. In store, again, coming from the data that Customer Radar is pulling together, we know that customers want staff who are friendly, they want retailers to be helpful, they want good service and great staff in store. And online, customers want it to be easy, they want to be able to find the products they're looking for at a good price, they want it to be quick, they want it to be super fast, and they want it to be easy to navigate their website. So just moving on speculatively, perhaps a little bit, to where retail is headed over the next couple of years. It goes without saying, these are hugely challenging times. We've never seen in almost living memory a recessionary environment like the one we're in. I think we're likely to see a sharp contraction in bricks and mortar stores. We will see a reduction in employee numbers, and we will see a number of retail businesses fold and cease trading over the next period. Some of that's unavoidable. The question is going to be how big that impact is. I think our best case scenario suggests that we might see sort of something like 16 or 20,000 people lose their jobs through retail, but you could quite easily see that number ballooning out very substantially. About 60% of our members are telling us they're not confident they will survive the current year, and that's a real worrying number, because if you took nearly 2/3 of retailers out of the mix, not only would it cause huge levels of unemployment and business disruption, but it would actually hollow out the retail offering that we've got through New Zealand, both on the high street and online. It would reduce the diversity of offering, and it would mean ultimately that customers were encouraged to be looking elsewhere overseas to get the products that they're wanting. So there's lots of businesses under pressure, but I have to say I am hearing some positive news too as I talk to retailers around the country. I am hearing from a surprisingly large number that things are actually going okay, that they're working through the challenges that they've had, and some are actually even trading ahead of where they were last year, and that's awesome news for those businesses. But it does point, I think, to the really big challenges that some are facing, because the average numbers, of course, reflect both good and bad news. There are some opportunities in all of this for retailers. Online, I think, has to be a key part of that opportunity. Not only does it allow you to move beyond your local footprint to a national audience, but you can go global as well. There's obviously a huge number of digital channels you can look at. You need to have a website. You probably want to be across social media. Whether you're selling there is another question. You might want to be looking at your own app as well. And I've been talking to some businesses who are actually expanding offshore during this time of crisis. So there are those who are in a really good position with a solid product offering, who are looking at opening new markets and doing that quite effectively, although there have been challenges with logistics. In store, there's a bit of an opportunity there with a shop local and buy Kiwi audience. There's people who want to do the right thing and support local businesses. It'll be interesting to see how long that holds for, particularly if those products are coming in at a higher price point. As the recessionary environment bites, I think you might see some of that tailing off and people become much more price focused as they look for those value opportunities. But there's certainly some really good brand opportunities there at the moment to improve things with that group of people. One point to note, I think, is that websites. And again, just talking to people around the country, there's quite a large number of retailers that didn't have a website before now, but have gone out and set one up. One of the learnings through that process that some have told me is that those websites can help drive foot traffic as well. So they're not necessarily making huge numbers of sales on the websites that they've established in the last couple of months, but it is allowing customers a real shop window where they can go browse, see what's available, and then make decisions to come in store and buy. And I have to say too, retailers really do need to make use of social media and Google, things like Google Maps and Apple Maps, to make sure customers can find them. You are invisible if you are not on Google Maps, essentially, for two large numbers of customers, and you need to be doing that in order to make sure people can find you. Finally, I think sort of the key opportunity really, again, isn't necessarily rocket science. It's about getting the basics right. Websites need to be easy to navigate, and you need to have a great logistics offering to back that up. You need to be really clear with your customers that your products are going to be delivered within 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, whatever that is, but be upfront about that and make sure you've got a logistics partner who can actually absolutely fulfill on that. One thing I'd say is, be funky by all means, but don't make it hard. There's a company that I sometimes buy coffee from that has the most fantastically, artistically, brilliantly well-designed website in the world, but it's almost impossible to work out how to make a purchase on it. And if you do that, it just makes it hard for customers, and they will go elsewhere. The other thing I've mentioned there is you need to be multi-platform. Don't hang all your eggs in one basket and say, "Oh, well, I've got a website now. We can rest easy." You probably need to be looking at those social channels as well. Again, in store, it's about making it easy. It's about having a one-stop shop where people can get what they need. It's about being accessible through having both being accessible online, but also the physical store. Car parks are really valuable. Good idea to think too about whether there are some more accessibly challenged customers who may benefit from wider aisles or something in store. And think about those things, and make it easy for customers to pay. Contactless payments have gone through the roof in terms of numbers over the last couple of months. They're increasingly popular with customers, and they shouldn't cost the kind of money that we're often hearing about in the media. So I'd really be encouraging everyone to be looking at switching contactless payments on if you haven't already, and then using it because it's ultimately cheaper for you to take at least Visa credit transactions contactlessly than it is to have the cards inserted into the machines. The other thing is to think about how you can add value to that in-store experience. Technology can do that. What can you do for the kids to keep them occupied while mum and dad are shopping? Is there coffee you can provide or at least have available? You don't necessarily need to do that yourself if you're a smaller store, but if you can work with others, I think, in the neighbourhood to do something cool that will help draw people in, because shopping is ultimately a social experience. We like to shop with friends and family. We like to share that experience, and we like to share what we're doing online too through social media. So increasingly people are tweeting, Instagramming and TikToking about their purchases. So it's really important to be across those channels. I think that was about, I just had one concluding slide really. So just to sort of wrap up what I was saying, I think my key outtakes is that customers are the same as they were before, but they are under more pressure. So prices and value is a really important thing. COVID-19 has accelerated a number of existing trends. The move to online has been happening for a long time, but it's vastly accelerated as a result of COVID, and that's probably true of moves to shrink store footprints as well. And finally, I just say digital's here to stay more than ever before, and that's increasingly where I think retailers need to be focused. That was it. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Greg. And that's a nice segue to our next two speakers. But before we do that segue, Greg, just a couple of questions for you. And for people who are listening, if you have questions of your own, please do feel free to put them into the chat box, which you'll find in your Zoom control panel. So Greg, you mentioned logistics being a vital part of managing in the current environment and of being profitable. That's the topic of webinar 6 which we did 3 weeks ago. So thank you for that little plug for that webinar. I have two questions for you, one that you mentioned quite early and one quite late in your talk. The first was about basket sizes. So particularly in the grocery sector, there's been a shift towards people shopping more often with smaller basket sizes, so shopping 2 or 3 times a week as opposed to once a fortnight, which might have been the case some years ago. It would seem that the statistics you're pointing to is suggesting a reversal of that trend. Do you think that's temporary, or has customer sentiment changed to that extent?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen a bit of a reversal of that trend over the last couple of months. I think that's probably a temporary trend. We're living in a convenient society where we don't plan our meals 2 weeks ahead typically. We've moved into that space very much because of concerns about what was going on in relating to COVID and around unfounded concerns about the availability of product that drove sort of big increases in basket sizes and meant that people had more food in their pantries that they were able then to use. My guess is that will roll back pretty quickly, moving back into those frequent shop visits to the supermarkets.
Yep, sweet. And the other trend that's been difficult to explain in New Zealand in retail courses that we teach is the resilience of retail in mall environments in New Zealand compared to some of our overseas counterparts, particularly the United States and Canada, but also to a certain extent the UK and Australia. So malls have been expanding in New Zealand, they're being refurbished, whereas overseas they're largely languishing or even closing. You're suggesting that we may start to see some of that pressure coming on to the high street, but do you also see it coming into the malls?
Yes, very, very much so. I think particularly those second-tier malls, perhaps third-tier malls that we've got around the country in some places, customers are increasingly wanting that one-stop shop, that mall experience where they can do everything, all their shopping needs, where they can get a coffee and go for a meal as well, perhaps go to a movie. So you don't get that in some of those smaller suburban or provincial malls, and I think you will start to see pressure on that retail footprint over time. We know it's expensive to operate physical stores, whether that's in a mall or on the high street, and I think retailers will need to be looking pretty closely at the costs of those physical stores, and they'll likely be looking to reduce those over time. And we've seen that already with businesses like H&J Smith closing its store in the Meridian Mall in Dunedin, and some of the Smith City stores closing, and actually quite a large number of stores have been slated for closure around the place.
And the other challenge with the mall environment is click and collect or other sort of hybrid online and in-store models. It was done rather very variably during lockdown. I purchased something from Kmart and had to wait in the car park while they brought out my purchase to the car. I mean, it worked, but it was not elegant. A standalone store has a much easier chance of blending those shopping systems.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you're a smaller store, particularly inside a mall, it can be quite challenging to operate a good and effective click and collect mechanism. One thing that possibly could be explored, although I'm not aware that it is sort of a joint click and collect system. So if you've got a store in a mall, it would be great if you were a customer coming to that mall to click and collect perhaps items from a couple of shops. If there was a dedicated collection point for that, that would be something very positive, I think.
Yeah, sweet. So we have one question in the chat box from Bruce. So cheers, Bruce. Thanks, mate. As we see the reduction in B and M locations, do you want to explain what you mean by your question, Bruce?
Yeah, so I'm just curious to know what that transition will be. So you mentioned that bricks and mortar stores will face some tough times, likely close, and then so do we see then a much quicker move to purely digital plays? So, and when I say digital first businesses, so their primary commerce is done through online.
Yeah. Look, I think it's going to be a bit of a mix. Omni-channel experiences, I think, are probably what's really important for customers, because it enables you to focus on your local physical market as well as expanding. But we will for sure see, I think, an increase in the number of digital-first businesses that we're seeing. And we are seeing that trend already. There's a number of SME retailers in particular who have started out as an online business. As that's been successful and as things have worked for them, they've transitioned into a bricks and mortar store. And there's some examples of some quite big businesses internationally that have done the same thing. Amazon, for example, has opened some physical stores in the US. So I think you will see both, but often new ones will be digitally led.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Greg. So that's a nice segue to Bruce, and we'll hear from you and Douglas.
Yeah, so that is a very nice segue for us. So Bruce, I'm the CEO at Putty, and we've got Doug who's going to do the main portion of the presentation. So our business is to build the best of tech right for our partners. So we're very much at that delivery end, and 100% agree. The trends are very much in favor for online businesses. And then the big question is, what do I use? How do I go about doing it? And what's it going to cost? So hopefully we can give you some really practical advice on that today. As a business, we've been going about 10 years. In fact, our 10-year anniversary was on Tuesday, which, is very much the life cycle of this industry in many ways. Internationally, we've done work for brands, retail brands like ASOS, Marks and Spencer's, Sports Direct. We built out all of their first mobile offerings. In New Zealand, our primary customers at the moment are Wendy's Hamburgers, Hirepool, Fletcher Building. But we've done a lot of apps, heck of a lot in the mobile space, but we do a broad array of web solutioning right up to native solutions. So that's enough about us. Let's get into a piece on strategy and some practical stuff about tools to use. Over to Doug.
Awesome, thanks for that. Morning, everyone. So I think Greg did a really good job of creating a very, very nice introduction for us to really come in and nail the kind of digital strategy piece. So from a tech point of view, we won't cover off the digital marketing aspect, as that's been done already from one of the webinars. But we will be focusing more on kind of the digital strategy in terms of the tools from which you kind of surround it, you center it upon. So obviously starting as to why a digital strategy is important, just picking up on a couple of things that Greg mentioned before, is the trends that we've been seeing over a number of years that have kind of been exacerbated due to the lockdown period. So these trends of things like e-commerce, rapidly growing, 1.3 trillion is seen at the top here, to 4.5 trillion expected in 2021. And then also just another small thing to highlight here is that a lot of people are kind of making purchases online in different ways. So for example, it's not just your mobile phones and computers that people need to be aware of now. It's actually Google Home and Alexa and how people are ordering things with their voice. And so when we think about that from a tech point of view, we have to think, how does the solution that I build work on these voice activated devices? Can my business be found via voice search optimization as opposed to just text search optimization? So these are various things that you might need to think about. But basically just saying online's pretty important. As we all know now. And so actually one of the resources here came from Greg himself, hilariously. As I was doing a little bit of research, I came across a few of his quotes. But one of the really big ones is that second point of online retail sales were up 350% under alert level 3. And as Greg mentioned, the amounts, although they were declining, we actually saw a massive increase in the number of purchases online. And so what we're trying to say here, I guess, is that digital is definitely, or definitely was the play during lockdown, but it seems that it may have changed some consumer habits for good and kind of sped up those transitions to moving online. So definitely need to be thinking about websites, apps, and all the like from that point of view. So if we kind of think about a digital strategy, as we said before, you have to build it around a tool. So there's a couple of key options that we're going to explore, which are websites and apps. And so first up, we'll look at websites. Now, without going too technical into a lot of this, we will try and keep this applicable to a wide range of people and quite surface level, but definitely if you have those in-depth questions for specific situations or tech stacks or anything like that, just chuck them to us and we'll try our best. So when we're looking at a website, a few points on kind of why it's important. So obviously it tells the world your story, right? It's the one information piece whereby anybody can look you up via any search thing and it has all of your information. Now, it might be an informational website where you're just trying to tell people A, B, C, or you might be trying to have a transactional website where you're actually trying to sell something. Either way, it needs to just be really clear what the purpose is and yeah, just really clear, easy to use. That's kind of the first point here. And so when Greg was talking about before about the multi-platform kind of approach that you should be taking, social media often comes up. Now, not many people transact on social media. What often happens is they use social media as a channel to direct people to your website. So your website is your social media destination. So the important point here is just you have to line up things like imagery, wording, products and prices. Everything has to be consistent and everything has to have a structure. So whether you're making the sales on social media or you're making it on the websites, just have it all planned out to make sure the consumer has a really clean journey that they're going through. The third point of 24/7 communication tools, quite an interesting one. So when people first start businesses or when they have just bricks and mortar shops and stuff, you always think, well, if anything's complicated in my business, I always have a salesperson there to just, communicate with the person and explain it. But online, that's not always the case. You might have some customer support or a chatbot, which is actually the point underneath, which is incredibly important. But even then, you're not going to have a salesperson that can really push things or spin a good yarn with someone and try and force them into buying something or anything like that, right? So what that means is your website has to be extremely clear in terms of what the customer can actually achieve via your website and how they go about achieving that. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got the point of that destination. So often websites are used to drive an action, and usually this action in terms of a sales will be things like bookings for meetings or for actual items themselves, lead generation, direct sales and indirect sales. So websites can be a pretty complicated space in that there are quite a lot of different things that you can do. But this is where just a really good, clear plan of what you're trying to achieve is incredibly important before you dive into it. And finally, the point of comparison and competition. So everybody's out there with a website these days. But as Greg was saying, there were actually a few people that didn't have a website and now they've gone and made a website, which is really good for them. And I just really hope that it's of, a high enough quality that when they get compared to other people, they're still being able to, stand out and make the revenue that they desire. Because in reality, what happens is people don't just go to one website and purchase a good. They'll go to one website and look at that good on that website, and then they'll open up their competitors and they'll look at the same item and they'll be seeing which one costs more, which one gets delivered faster, what's the higher quality, things like that. So your website is something that's always going to be compared to other websites and the products in there are just the same. So think about not just your website standing alone, but how it compares to everybody else in the market. And so your website is going to do a lot for you. So it really needs to work for you in that sense as well. So we've touched on a few of these points, but I do want to highlight, first of all, stating your unique selling point clearly. And so that, again, is that point of difference, right? Is it the price? Is it the speed of delivery? Is it the quality? Something like that needs to be clearly stated because, again, you don't have that salesperson there pushing that in front of the potential customer all the time. On the top right-hand side, we have the sensible and straightforward domain name. Might seem obvious, but when you go to domain name, like purchasing websites like GoDaddy is one that often comes up, is that people will search for a domain name that they want, for example, www.puttyapps.com or something, and then it might cost them a significant amount of money, and then they might see a cheaper one underneath, which is like puttyapps573potato.org or something, and it's $5, and you're like, oh, maybe I'll just get that one because it's a lot cheaper. I would stop you there and say, no, invest in a good domain name because nobody's going to remember that potato.org at the end of it. And it needs to just be really sensible and clear and just make sense. So there are a few different things that you need to invest in with a website, but clarity and ease of use is always front of mind. As Greg was saying before, websites need to be simple and clear. So wherever that comes into play, make that investment. And look, that's the next point, be incredibly simple and user-friendly, right? People need to be able to use your website without having someone to explain it to them. So that's something to just always be aware of. SEO optimization and having a way of interacting with customers. So I touched on chatbots before, and they are a really, really good way of having kind of an interactive FAQ page. So FAQs are really good from the point of view that you could have like images, for example, don't know how to do this, click this drop-down menu, and then you take a little screenshot of it, and then you show the user how they might achieve those things. But a chatbot is kind of like a fun, interactive way to get those text-based FAQs. So someone might say, how do I make a purchase? And then your chatbot says, well, you can go here and click this and then do X, Y, Z or whatever. And it makes it a little bit more fun. And it just means that the customer actually will probably stay on your website for longer because they're sending messages and receiving messages and things. So there's a lot of chatbot options out there. And I definitely look into some of them. For adding them to your website as kind of like a digital salesperson, if you will, but definitely combined with a good FAQ system. So having those FAQs that have the images is vitally important as well. Customer testimonials, it might sound like something that everyone's doing, but a lot of people aren't. And customer testimonials go an incredibly long way because often people will, when they're looking at making a purchase, they will be doing things like looking up the rating and looking up the customer reviews. So Google reviews is often the place that people go to. And when you go out to a restaurant, you look at Zomato and you look at all the online ones for food. People do the same thing with products, especially when they can't actually see the product themselves. For example, if you were to go buy like a shirt or a computer or something like that, and you can't test the product because you're buying it online, customer testimonials are always going to be a really great source of information for them. So definitely would put as many of them out there as you can. And then just keep it constantly updated with relevant information. So what we kind of need to understand then is, because a website is important and there's so many different important aspects, which kind of option do you go for? Because there's so many different types of websites that you can build and different ways you can build them, right? So if we have a look at platform, so the two on the left-hand side are platform opportunities. So the first one is an informational website. So as Greg said before, there are some websites out there where you might not want to do a lot of transacting, if any. It might actually just be an informational website where you get people to come to your store because maybe they're making a big purchase, such as a computer or something, and you think, well, I can do a lot better job explaining this in person. Maybe you just go for a very simple informational website. It could cost maybe 10, 20 grand, could take you 2 to 3 weeks. And to be honest, you could do it yourself using a platform provider such as Wix, Squarespace, or GoDaddy. And so what you can do there is either do it yourself or get an experienced designer to do it. So with these platform websites, the key thing to note is that you don't need to understand how to code at all. You don't need to understand any of the back-end, front-end, developer, language, speak, all of that stuff. It's really simple. But if you don't have the time, or you don't think you have a good eye for design, just get a designer to do it, because they can use these tools. And to be honest, a lot of web designers can make these websites pretty easily because they've done a lot of them in the past and they've been trained on it. So that's kind of your first option. But a lot of the people in retail space will probably be looking at this middle option, which is the e-commerce or transactional website. So this is where the big name of Shopify comes up. Now, Shopify actually has an incredible suite of offerings, and some very large companies are on there. Allbirds, that make the sustainable shoes, and Tesla are two massive names that actually use Shopify. So it can handle large amounts of orders, large transactional pricing, and essentially is just a really solid platform that you can build something out on that, again, you don't need a developer, but you could get a web developer to do it for you if you'd like some maybe customized little bits here and there, just some little add-ons to the platform. Something like this would take maybe 4 to 12 weeks, so 1 to 3 months, and you could be looking at anything from 25 to 150K, and then there'll be some ongoing costs. So as always with platforms, you'll be paying an ongoing cost somewhere between 50 to actually some websites, if you make them yourselves, could be $50 a year. But if you're getting Shopify and you're getting transactions, you could be paying a couple of hundred a month type of thing to just keep it going. So again, you can do it yourself, web designers can do it, or you can get a developer in to create some little add-ons and help you out. And then on the right-hand side, we have custom. So this is our area of expertise, which is essentially we have a group of very experienced people that can make anything software related. So we have the design team, development, and testers, which are what you need in order to develop something custom. So when we say custom, what we mean is we're building from the ground up and we're not using these platform technologies. Now, the big question everyone says is, why would I go for custom when there's all of these platform ones? Now, the answer is there are a lot of platform offerings out there, and each platform offering is different, but a lot of the platform offerings don't allow you to do very complicated things. And if you want anything custom or complicated outside of the realms of what the platform offers, then you really need to just start building custom, because a lot of these platforms such as Shopify have plugins that may be able to do 1 or 2 extra things. But at the end of the day, when you start to build your own system and way of doing things, you're going to need your own technology. And that's where custom really comes into play. So that can take a couple of months and can be anything from 50 grand to maybe 200-300. So really depends on how complicated you want to go. And then next up, we've got mobile apps. So a lot of it is the same in the sense of why an app is important, similar to a website, but there are some key points of difference. So I want to touch on the personalization. So with an app, you have your own settings that you can enact. And so that just allows for a great user experience. As we've been looking at with the online sales trends, people just like personalized experiences, from targeted ads to buying things through native applications on their phone. It just makes things feel a bit more like they're talking to you as opposed to talking to the masses. So that's why an app can be quite useful. Some of them can work offline. So for example, if you have an app which has a catalog of all of your items and their prices and things like that, you can just have a quick look and it shows you all the information and you don't need to be connected to the internet. Works incredibly fast because it's using your phone, all the technology in there. Ease of sending push notifications. So one of the big things with a website or web app, such as let's say Facebook, is that it can send you notifications, but it can only send you them when Facebook is open on your browser. With the benefit of a mobile app, if someone downloads it, you can send a push notification to them at any time. So they can have their phone off and you can send a, hey, we've got a 2-for-1 deal going for the next 1 hour, go check it out. And then they're like, okay, I've got to open your app and have a look. So that's quite a good one for enacting some sales and benefits there. It's a new stream of conversion. When you have an app on the Play Store or the Apple Store, you basically get people who might stumble across it through recommendations and things like that. Again, point of comparison, makes use of mobile hardware and software. A classic example of this is Receipt Bank. So Receipt Bank is a system that people use to reconciliate their receipts and things like that. And so instead of taking one of your receipts and emailing it, like faxing it or photocopying it or whatever to your system and using a computer, you can just pick up your phone and take a photo and scan it, and then it will be up in the cloud instantly. So apps can really make use of hardware like that. Incredibly flexible. And then finally, everyone's spending a lot of time on their apps. As we know, everyone's spending more time on their phones these days, but that's because they're spending it on apps, and apps are definitely something to be aware of. So what does it need to do? Just conscious of time, so I'm gonna blitz through this, but essentially really simple, clear navigation. Need to be thinking about things like data protection, access to the FAQs or service desks, encourages your user retention, and basically just needs to actually help you with something. There's a lot of apps you download and then you're like, why did I actually download this? It doesn't seem to do anything. But then the ones that do really help you, you know when you get there. And the one I want to touch on actually is that middle one on the left, intuitive navigation. That's something that Greg brought up before. People need to actually just be able to use the things that you have without someone having to explain them to them. So intuitive navigation is incredibly key there. So looking at kind of the different options that we have, we've got the template on the left. So again, templates range in quality and size and price, but you could be looking at getting maybe a developer, designer, or yourself, if you know a little bit, to spend anywhere up to a month to be building this. And then you could be spending something like $500 a month. Might be a little bit cheaper, might be more expensive. Really depends if it's just an informational app, if it's a transactional app, and things like that. Then you've got web apps and native apps on the custom side. So we're going to dive into these a little bit deeper in the next slides of just kind of the differences. But the key takeaway here is that a native app takes a little bit longer to build than a web app, and costs a little bit more. So this might be a nice place for Bruce, if you want to jump in on these ones with me. But we're just looking into the custom apps a little bit deeper with the web apps and native apps. So when we're looking at a kind of development point of view, with web apps, it's definitely faster and a little bit cheaper, and opens it up to real-time updates, because people go to a website essentially and then everything's already updated. Whereas with native apps, because of its closed environments, people might actually have to go to the App Store or the Play Store to download those updates and those changes that you make. And it also just is a little bit more costly and takes a little bit more time when getting into the development. Types of usage, Bruce, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, so I think actually this is one of the main fundamental questions of if you're going to go for a web app or a native app is the usage, right? So people are pretty comfortable with search and looking for a business through a website and then being led to a web app, and they tend to be in frequent usage. Native apps only work by rule if it is a frequently engaged customer, so a really loyal customer that wants a lot out of the brand or a lot out of the retail experience. So it's a really critical point of what options you might be looking at is the frequency of usage. And once you get that frequency of usage through a mobile app, they tend to really explore and get the most out of the app experience as well. Yeah, and I think from a marketing standpoint, your capability to talk to a web app and find those users, because they're more casual, is a general web experience, whereas it's a pretty dedicated experience for a consumer to go into a native app. So you've got to go into a store, you've got to search, you've got to download, there's user registration. So you've got to really think about that experience and what that user is going to get out of it. Features, the big reason that big brands use native apps is they can play around with the hardware in the device, so they can really get a cool experience, take advantage of camera and GPS software. That's really a big play, and that will evolve over time, because that's what Apple and Google wants out of their devices. They want brands to take advantage of the hardware that they have built. And then lastly, big one is if you do go down that path of a native app, there's ways around it, but you're probably going to end up sharing some of your revenue with Apple and Google as well. So a big call to make.
And as Bruce says, like there's that big question, which is kind of like, how do you know which one is right for you, right? The difference between custom and platform, and then within custom, you've got web apps and you've got native apps, and there's just so many different choices to be made. And really, you just kind of need to be asking yourself, where are your customers, and how are you going to communicate with them in the best way possible? So we've got, some social platforms on the left and some selling platforms on the right, just to get your brain ticking. But essentially, if you were targeting a specific type of users, you would need to go to the platforms they're on, and you'd have to communicate with them in a way that makes sense to them, right? So we'll take you through just a very quick kind of case study, or customer segment rather, of Gen Z. So Gen Z is basically me. I'm a Gen Z person, so I can attest to a lot of the things that we're going to say. And they're a really good customer segment to have a look at, because there's a lot of information about them at the moment in the media and in reports and everything, because everybody's studying us to figure out why we're spending so much time on our phones, apparently. So having a look at the proposed strategy of kind of how you would break this down, you'd need to find out where they spend their time, how they spend their money, build a system that's good for them and actually engages with them in a way they want to. And then you need to highlight the things that matter to them and communicate in a way that makes sense to them. So if we look at the first one of figuring out where they spend their time, it's very clearly a lot of social media places and a lot of these sales platforms. But in particular, as mentioned before, Instagram and TikTok are just massive. Facebook and Snapchat are on the decline, but they're still up there. But it's important to note things like young people generally aren't on Twitter and LinkedIn. Those are generally for the older demographics. So Gen Z would be there. From a sales point of view, TradeMe, Facebook marketplaces are huge and they spend heaps of time. And then also AliExpress and Etsy and things like that. So if you have a rough idea of where they are, you can start to think, okay, so they're spending time on TikTok and Instagram mostly, right? What are these things? Well, you can access them via a web app online, but their main body is actually a native app solution. So now you've got to start thinking, if Gen Z were my target customer and they're spending a lot of time on native apps, maybe I should be thinking about a native app. So that's just one point that we would go to. Oh, that's a blank slide. There we go. And then the second one is figure out how they spend their money and where they spend their money. So the point of this slide, in short, is essentially the bolded text on the right-hand side, which says 61% of Gen Z consumers worldwide use their phone to purchase products online. So now we've got this idea that they're spending time on native social media apps and they're buying things through their phone. And they're obviously starting to comprise of a lot of global consumers, as said in the bottom left-hand corner, 40% now total is comprised of Gen Z. So then if we're thinking about how do we want to kind of engage with them, like what's the right way to do it? Well, this one report that I was reading said that 64% of Gen Z respondents say that they're constantly online, and more than half were more insecure about their phone versus their wallet. And so with a lot of people having a phone and then being insecure of it and making purchases and things like this, we're already seeing that definitely a mobile app has to be to play for a group like Gen Z. And that final point of Gen Z spends more than 4 hours a day on their phone, I was actually surprised it was that low. I thought the stat was going to say something like 8 to 10 hours because that feels like a more realistic number. And then you kind of have to highlight the things that matter to these consumers, right? So let's say you're moving into a market where you need to appeal to Gen Z. How do you know what appeals to them? Well, there's the Colmar-Brunson study from 2020, which has this amazing slide, which I've just ripped off here. And it shows the issues that they care about. And it's a really good slide. And I think I'll be sending these slides later to Andrew, so you guys can take a look whenever. But the key thing here is they care about things very different in some aspects to what the adults care about. And obviously a lot of the time adults are very child focused in their issues and beliefs and things like that because they have children and the youth don't have children. So, there's a little bit of discrepancy there. But it's things like 61% thinking about buildup of the plastic in the environment, whereas that's not even seen. Oh, sorry, no, it is 69 above. So we've got that there. And then protection of personal data and pollution of lakes and rivers. So that's the one that's not seen on the one above. So it's like the buildup of the plastic environment is an issue shared by both demographics, but then there's another environmental issue of the pollution of lakes, rivers, and seas seen on that the second line of the youth. And so it's just thinking about how can I talk to the youth? What are the issues that matter to them and things like that? And then if we think about TikTok as a platform, just because it's the biggest one at the moment, you need to communicate in a way that makes sense to the younger generation, right? So for Gen Z, if they're your target customer, they spend a lot of time on TikTok. How does TikTok work? It basically tries to grab people's attention in about the first second that you're watching it. Otherwise, they'll scroll through to the next video. So what that means is successful people have those kind of catchy things to hook you in from the start. So that's just a tactic that you can kind of have a look at. So very quick, the final thing really is New Zealanders in this Colmar-Brunson study actually said a bunch of things that they thought the businesses could do better from the environmental point of view and also just more sustainable kind of ways of doing things. So some of the brands that New Zealand believes are incredibly sustainable are like EcoStore, TradeAid, Earthwise, Meridian Energy, Whitaker's, Tesla, things like that. And so for the companies that don't appear there, they're saying, maybe you should make better quality, longer lasting products so I don't have to go buy, fast fashion all the time. Or we should engage in recycling or think about where you get your labor from and things like that. So with this, we're kind of seeing that they are very active and they are very vocal about the things that matter to them. And all this information's out there, so you can make it very, very informed decisions really when it comes to this. So kind of the answers to what we were looking at was that, where do they spend their time? You know, it's social media. How do they spend their money? It's on their phone. We need to build a good system for them, which means that it needs to be online because they're online, but it needs to have a really good mobile optimization if it's a web app, or it just needs to be a native app at the end of the day. And you need to highlight the things that matter to them, like the environmental impact, and communicate with a way that makes sense to them, which is just quickly and on the right platforms. So the play for Gen Z people would be a native app. It works really fast. It retains their settings and their information, and it makes it personalized. And it's a custom experience, which they really, really enjoy. And that's why we see a lot of people taking to Facebook Marketplace and TradeMe Marketplace on the native app solutions to make a lot of their sales and a lot of their purchases from a younger generation point of view. So definitely in the retail space, that's kind of the angle that you should be looking at if you're trying to target Gen Z people. So that kind of brings us to a close of a very high level overview of kind of the tech space that we're in. So apps and websites and all those pros and cons and things. And we've got obviously a link to our website at the bottom, but we'll open the floor to questions now. And I saw Andrew furiously writing some things, so hopefully he's got some questions for me.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Douglas and Bruce. Doug, if you wouldn't mind stopping your screen sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So I have two questions for you about the role of voice search, which you mentioned quite early on, and digital assistants. So with voice search, obviously that is quite a different user experience for how they would navigate, how they would request. Is there a role for voice with apps?
100%. So when you say, is there a role for voice in apps in terms of like carrying out actions, or yeah, so definitely, yeah. So you can kind of you can put in anything really with activations for the different likes. So normally we think about apps in terms of clicking things to make things appear and do actions, but a lot of the time you can actually just put in voice activated things. So you could build an app whereby you talk to it and it writes down your whatever you're saying, and it could be a journaling app, for example. So instead of typing everything out, you just speak to it. You could have an app whereby people can make voice commands such as purchase this item, and then it could put that item in your cart and things like that. So voice definitely can play a role. It's an interesting one because like you said, I kind of brought it up in terms of voice optimized search, which is where we're seeing it at the moment. I have to admit, I haven't seen it too often within the apps themselves, as it's more of a way that people get to the app or get to the website. But there definitely is a role that is growing within the app space. Bruce, have you seen anything there?
Yeah, well, so I think it's evolving, right? The main thing is that Apple and Google are both now all over it. So the native functionality is enabled for voice across practically any feature. So I think watch this space. It will be very interesting to see what developers like us do and use it for. Sweet,
thank you. And the digital assistant, I know there's an experiment going on in Noel Leeming with their woman. I think she's called Nola. You can see her at the Newmarket store. Obviously, that's a physical store digital interface blend. What role might there be for websites or apps for that sort of humanized digital interface?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think when people go to websites and apps and things like that, they kind of like the control that they have as a user, I feel like. So having a digital assistant in the way that the physical stores have is not something I personally foresee happening quite a lot. How I feel it will be used on websites is more in terms of the chatbot and the FAQ type stuff, which is kind of like we're here to help you if you need, whereas that digital assistant in the store was kind of like replacing the salesperson a lot of the time, I feel like. What's your take on that one, Bruce?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty early days as well for use of digital assistants, and let's be honest, they're only as good as their intelligence base, and that's going to take time for it to evolve. And I think the Noel Lemming case with Unique, which is the Kiwi crowd that built out that bot, is just so cool because they're on it, they're on the trend now. And so yes, it may not fulfill all of your needs as a consumer when you go and have a chat to the bot at this point, but I think 2-3 years down the track, when that bot has processed all of that information and can really give you some cool insights, that's where I think you just need to kind of be on top of these trends now to start to look at it, how you build up your database of information so that when you do go with bots, they're going to, you know, drive a pretty cool experience.
Right, thank you. So I asked that question because we have a PhD student at Massey University who's looking at digital assistants, Simon Moore, and NOLA is one of the bots that he is investigating. And just to plug another PhD student at Massey, Martin Mahler, who's looking at mobile payment systems, which is my next question. You mentioned that Gen Z are more concerned about not having their phone on them than their wallet. But actually, aren't they more or less the same thing these days?
Exactly.
It could be both because their phone is what they carry their cards in, and you know, so their phone kind of is their wallet in a physical sense, but also their phone may carry their digital card through a mobile payment system. Is this something that you see a lot of work going on in?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, like physically, people attach their cards to the back of their phone, and then digitally, all the cards are on the phone now. I mean, like, and the beauty of the phone is it does more than just a wallet, right? So it's a wallet plus other things. So definitely, everyone's concerned about it. And there's a lot of work being done in that transactional space, right? Like, there's so many people now are accepting contactless payments and things like that, which makes digital payments so much easier. Payments through QR codes, as we've seen with WeChat, payments with digital credit cards, or even just sending via bank accounts and things like that. So incredibly so. I think it's just going to ramp up over time.
Yeah, and I'll close from our point of view, which, you know, we've got a Gen Zer in our business, Doug, who teaches a heck of a lot. And if you don't, you just got to get on the research now, because 40% of the market are Gen Z, and they act in a very different way, and everything is digital first, right? It's just where they're at. So you want to sell them stuff or send your message across them so that they can consider it. You got to look at what their usage patterns are.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'll open the floor for those in the audience if they wish to ask any audible questions. Now's your time. If there aren't any of those, I will open the floor to both Greg, Bruce and Doug for any final words. So we'll pause just for a minute to see if there are any audible questions. And in the absence of any of those, Greg, anything you'd like to say in response to what Bruce and Doug had to say, or anything you've thought of? Damn, I wish I'd said that.
No, nothing really to add. Really interesting presentation from you guys, so thank you for that.
Fantastic. And Bruce and Doug?
Yeah, likewise, Greg. Like, I think it was a really nice segue into what we had to say, but also just touching on a lot of the points that you did with regards to the value of the online transactions decreasing, but the amount of them increasing was a really interesting one for me, because it kind of it contradicts a little bit of the stuff that we've seen in the studies of people saying that they want to engage in like products, for example, that might cost more but last a little bit longer. And so I'd be interested to dive a little bit deeper into that, as in the like actual transactional cost of each of those products, is it higher than what we've seen, or is it lower than what we've seen? Because we're talking about the end value, aren't we, in their cart at the end of it, but those individual product transactions would be a really interesting thing to dive into. So but like you say, it shows the times, right? In a recessionary environment, sometimes people's values and things like that go out the window when they don't have the money to put out there to represent their values. They just have to survive with the things that they're buying. So really interesting stuff.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all three of our speakers, Greg, Bruce and Doug. And thank you to our audience for being here. We really do appreciate your involvement in this webinar and in this series. So this recording for webinar 9 will join those from webinars 1 through 8 on YouTube. And you can find those through the Massey Business School Business Reboot page, of which this Retail Reboot is one part. You can also find them on Stuff's Prosper page. Prosper is their dedicated area for small to medium-sized enterprises. And Stuff have been fabulous in promoting these webinars. And there will be one further post by them coming next week. So this is the final webinar. It's been my great privilege to host 20 fantastic speakers from across the retail sector, plus the odd lawyer or 4, and some very talented IT professionals like what we've had today. I very much appreciate the willingness of all of our speakers to engage in this webinar series, almost all of them from their homes, and of course, you, our audience. I couldn't have managed this without the assistance of some fantastic people at Massey University, Jane Richardson and Verity Lennox, and Sarah Dodds, who you've been seeing today. She's hosted 2 of the webinars. And most of all, the absolutely fabulous Juanita Neville-Torito and Lisa Donaldson of RetailX. Please do check out the other webinars in the series and spread the word to those you know who may be desperately seeking advice on how to get online, connect with customers, renegotiate leases, manage employees, handle stock, and manage cash flows. All of this, of course, is the usual stuff of retail, but these are far from usual times. Mā te wa.